Welcome, folks, to this edition of the 700 Club. The outgoing ambassador for the U.S. to Russia said, "Don't trust Putin. Beware, Mr. President, of Putin." And now we learn that Iran is teaming up with Russia, Putin's Russia, in the Persian Gulf and rolling out its newest weapons and threatening the mother of all wars. It's trying to intimidate the Trump administration into dropping economic sanctions. And as Chris Mitchell reports, the alliance with Russia could turn the Gulf into a geopolitical flashpoint.
For months, Iran has harassed international shipping in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. Now comes news that Russia is preparing to join the fray in these key waterways.
We know by the Iranian media that Russia is trying to exploit the current crisis in order to fulfill its strategic aim of having expanded military forces in the Persian Gulf. So the Iranian Navy revealed that it's going to be a mutual drill between Moscow and Tehran in the Persian Gulf.
Down under in Australia, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is making his case for the West to unite in protecting shipping from Iranian aggression.
So what we've asked 60-plus nations to do is provide assistance in securing and deterring from and securing the Strait of Hormuz so that commercial vessels can travel through there.
But Mansharov says Russia's presence will embolden the Islamic Republic.
The more that Iran feels secured, it is encouraged to keep challenging the U.S. and the Europeans in this strategic location of the Hormuz Strait. And you can assume that Iran would continue to seize oil vessels of the U.S. and the Western countries in this region.
And complicating the U.S.-Russia relationship, U.S. Ambassador John Huntsman says he'll be stepping down. In his resignation letter, he urged President Trump to stand up to Putin. He said, going forward, we must continue to hold Russia accountable when its behavior threatens us and our allies. Meanwhile, an attack against two Iranian-backed militia bases operating inside Iraq. Most suspect Israel, which, if true, would be its first strike inside Iraq since Israeli planes knocked out a nuclear reactor in 1981.
The reason this is happening is because there's been a very deeply felt concern in the Israeli security establishment in recent months at the prospect of the Iranians placing short-range ballistic missiles in the hands of their Iraqi Shia militia clients, who would then deploy those missiles in western Iraq and thus have Israel within range of those missiles for the first time.
Spire and Mansharov say Iran leaders play a dangerous game of flexing their muscles while keeping an eye on the U.S. political calendar. They maintain that Iran wants Trump to lose so they can deal with a more pliable White House. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Well, it looks like the Iranians want to go to war. They want us to come to war against them, and apparently Trump is not buying it right now, but sooner or later they're looking for trouble. And, well, we need some buffer over there. That whole situation is chaotic. The Iranians are taking charge of Iraq. The Iranians are working in Syria, and they're highly militant. They don't have what it takes to really mount anything, but they are very aggressive. And it's almost as if in the Straits of Hormuz, they're looking for war. You can't keep stealing British flag vessels and think the Brits are going to lie down and take it. They're just not going to do it. Well, in other news, North Korea says its recent missile launches are a warning to the U.S. and South Korea. John Jessup has more on that.
That is right, Pat. North Korea has carried out 4 weapons demonstrations in the past 2 weeks. Tuesday, launching 2 short-range ballistic missiles that hit targets on an island off the eastern coast. Dictator Kim Jong-un says the tests are a warning to the United States and South Korea over planned joint military exercises. Negotiations between the U.S. and North Korea to get rid of its nuclear stockpile are at a stalemate. Well, tensions are still high in the trade war between the United States and China, although the market settled down yesterday. Beijing is once again devaluing its currency, and as Charlene Aaron reports, some analysts say those moves are hurting China more than the U.S.
The market made a partial comeback Tuesday after China indicated it would stabilize its currency. But today, they've weakened it again. Stocks bounced back after Monday's calamitous 767-point drop-off. The Dow gaining 311 points and the S&P closing up 1.3%, the first gain in 7 days. But there's anxiety today after China once again devalued the yuan. This despite a statement Tuesday from its central bank governor pledging not to use exchange rates for competitive purposes and to keep the Chinese currency at a reasonable and balanced level. Now it appears China is at it again, setting the rate just below 7 yuan to the dollar. Despite the uncertainty, the Trump administration says China is getting the worst of this trade war.
They're in poor shape economically. We're in great shape economically. And frankly, the biggest loser is China right now.
However, China's state-owned businesses are pledging not to buy U.S. agricultural products, putting the hurt on American farmers. The president took to Twitter saying, "Our great American farmers know that China will not be able to hurt them." Kudlow promises farmers will continue to get assistance from the White House.
Farmers have been great. They're patriots. They've backed us 100%.
China's aggressive action comes after the administration threatened to impose new tariffs on $300 billion of Chinese goods. Stephen Moore, an economist with the Heritage Foundation, says China has been abusing its trade relationship with the U.S. for decades, and it's getting worse every day.
They are engaged in all sorts of issues with respect to national security. They're stealing our intellectual property. They have not opened up their markets to our producers the way we've opened up our markets to them. So Trump is fighting the good fight here.
In the end, he believes the two sides will reach an agreement because China needs U.S. markets.
There's an old saying that Trump used to say that if we can't trade with China, we sneeze. If they can't trade with us, they catch pneumonia.
One issue that could blow up trade negotiations is if China carries out a military crackdown on the protests in Hong Kong. Tuesday, a Chinese official warned the protesters not to mistake China's patience for weakness. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
Thanks, Charlene. Pat, any idea on how all of this will end?
No, I really can't. But the truth is, China has had an enormous trade imbalance with the U.S. I mean, we are buying hundreds of billions of dollars worth of goods for them. It's probably 4 or 5 times as much as they are buying from us. And so, as Larry Kudlow said so very cogently, the Chinese can't afford a trade war with America. They'll get hurt very badly. But we're sitting here in this studio right now, and I want to show you, we wanted to get a screen that would enhance what we do. You see that thing over there, that screen? Get close, look, give me a little closer. See that? All right. Now, what goes in that is some electronics, and it comes from China. And until so it's been held up. I mean, so is it hurting the farmers? Yes. Is it hurting us? Yes. I mean, I'm right here, and I'm telling you, those electronic parts that would go into this and enhance this particular program are made in China. So we are buying from them. But without question, if we put the screws to them, their economy can't stand it. And the president knows that. I don't want a trade war with China. I don't want hostilities with China. But they have taken advantage of us, and they have stolen our intellectual property. The big thing is when a company wants to do business in China, the Chinese force them to give over all kinds of intellectual property as a bribe, if you will, or a tariff in order to do business in that country. And so they've got all this intellectual property, and they're using it to their advantage. And so they've taken advantage of us terribly. And it's time that somebody stop it. But you and I don't want a trade war with China. It just won't be a good thing. John?
Pat, President Trump offers comfort in his visits to Dayton, Ohio and El Paso, Texas today, the sites of 2 mass shootings that left 31 people dead this weekend. The shooter who killed 9 in Dayton had a long history of mental illness. His ex-girlfriend said he wrestled with suicidal thoughts and urges to carry out violent attacks. Meanwhile, investigators say the El Paso gunman is showing no signs of remorse for killing 22 people. Officials say he did not originally plan to launch his attack at Walmart, but only stopped there to eat after getting lost. He then walked around the store, Pat, before deciding to carry out his attack.
I believe there's bipartisan support for some sort of a measure that would enable states, cities to put in custody people like that who are mentally ill and restrain them. You know, I know we want freedom of movement and so forth, but somebody who's writing insane thoughts and needs to be institutionalized, or at least to be restrained, we cannot allow them freedom to just go into the Walmarts of this world and start shooting people. We can't do it, and it's too painful. So would it be necessary? I think yes. We're going to have something, and I think Congress is considering that, and I hope they get on with it. We can't wait very long, John.
Pat, with Americans beginning the process of healing after this weekend's shootings, we're hearing stories of many turning to faith, including Vice President Pence, who spoke yesterday about the power of faith and prayer.
The Bible tells us that if his people who are called by his name will humble themselves and pray, that he'll hear from heaven and he'll heal our land. And in this dark hour for the people of El Paso and Dayton, we do well to pray.
Vice President Pence also reminded the crowd about the importance of community, saying the greatest form of community in the modern world is faith. Well, it could become harder for Americans to live according to their religious beliefs if a bill before Congress becomes law. Opponents warned the Do Not Harm Act certainly would not live up to its name because it strips away parts of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. As CBN's Jenna Browder reports, that measure has protected the rights of groups like the Little Sisters of the Poor and Hobby Lobby in the past.
The Religious Freedom Restoration Act was passed by Congress in the 1990s and signed into law by President Bill Clinton. But now some want to chip away at it with another measure called the Do No Harm Act.
This bill would gut very important religious freedom protections for countless Americans, people of all walks of life, of Christians, Muslims, Jews, and so many others that throughout the 25-year history of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act have had their right to freely live out their faith protected against government efforts to tell them that they must violate their conscience or do something that violates their beliefs.
Matt Sharp with the Alliance Defending Freedom says the bill's name is misleading and would do great harm to people of faith.
For its 25-year history, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act has been used to, for example, protect the freedom of a Native American boy to be able to wear his hair long, consistent with his faith. It's protected healthcare providers and individuals who objected to paying for contraceptions or abortions or things like that. And it even helps faith-based adoption providers be able to operate consistent with their faith while helping kids to find a forever home.
And it protected Hobby Lobby in a 2014 case that went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Affordable Care Act had mandated all employers fund insurance for abortion-inducing drugs. The owners of Hobby Lobby said doing this violated their religious conscience. And in a 6-2 vote, the court sided with them, citing RFRA.
Purpose of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, RFRA, is to protect the rights of individuals of faith all across the country, regardless of what faith that is.
And according to Craig Parshall with the National Religious Broadcasters, this goes all the way back to the Founding Fathers.
If you look back to the original founding intention in the debates in Congress behind the writing of the First Amendment, what was in the minds of the founders as established in the congressional record at the time, it's real clear what they wanted to make sure was that government would never coerce a person to do or say or engage in something that violated their religious conscience.
Supporters of the Do No Harm Act believe RFRA is too often used as a weapon to discriminate against women, minorities, and the LGBTQ community. Both Parshall and Sharp disagree.
They're pushing this idea that RFRA is harmful, that it's being used to hurt other individuals, and that's simply false.
Right now, the Do No Harm Act has been introduced in both the House and the Senate, but so far only the House has held a hearing for it. In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Thanks, Jenna. And Pat, with a Republican-controlled Senate, it's probably slim chances that it'll pass there.
It won't, but it just shows why your vote is going to be so important in the next election.